Right now, as you are watching this, oil futures are surging past levels we haven't seen in over a year. The Strait of Hormuz, the most critical choke point for global energy, has just become the most dangerous waterway on the face of the earth. And the reason? Iran has reportedly shot down a United States military aircraft. This is not a drill. This is not a hypothetical war game scenario from a Pentagon briefing room. This happened, and the ripple effects are already tearing through every single market, every single capital, and every single military command center on the planet. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through changes everything you thought you knew about where this conflict was heading. Here is what we know at this hour. U.S. Central Command has confirmed that an American military aircraft was engaged by Iranian air defense systems while operating over international airspace in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz. The aircraft, and we are, still working to confirm the exact type was struck and went down. Now, the Pentagon has been extraordinarily careful with its language tonight. The official statement from CENTCOM reads, and I quote, "A U.S. military aircraft was targeted by Iranian surface-to-air missile systems while conducting routine operations in international airspace over the Strait of Hormuz. The aircraft was hit. Recovery and response operations are underway." That's it. That's the full statement. No details about the crew, no details about the type of aircraft, no details about whether this was a manned or unmanned platform. And that silence, that very deliberate, very controlled silence, tells you a lot about how seriously the Pentagon is treating this. Now, here's what's critical, and I need you to pay very close attention to this. The phrase international airspace. That is doing enormous legal and strategic work in that sentence. Because if the United States can demonstrate with radar data, with satellite imagery, with signals intelligence, that this aircraft was operating in internationally recognized airspace and not inside Iranian sovereign territory, then under international law, this is an act of aggression. Full stop. That changes the legal framework for any American response. It changes what options are on the table. It changes what allies are obligated to support. And here's the thing that should genuinely unsettle you tonight. We've been here before. Almost exactly here. And last time, the world got lucky. In June 2019, Iran shot down an American RQ-4A Global Hawk drone, a massive high-altitude surveillance aircraft over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran claimed the drone was in their airspace. The United States said it was in international airspace. President Trump at the time authorized a retaliatory military strike and then famously pulled it back with just 10 minutes to spare. 10 minutes! That's how close we came to a full-scale military conflict with Iran in 2019. But tonight, something is fundamentally different. And this is the part that analysts I've been speaking with over the past hour are genuinely alarmed about. The geopolitical environment in 2019 was tense, but there were functioning diplomatic back channels. There were intermediaries. Oman was facilitating communication. The Europeans were still operating under the framework of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. There were off-ramps. Tonight, those off-ramps are gone, systematically dismantled, one by one. The JCPOA is effectively dead. Relations between Washington and Tehran are at their lowest point in decades. Iran's government has hardened significantly. The Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has consolidated even more control over military decision-making. And the broader Middle East, it's already on fire. We have an active grinding conflict in Gaza. We have Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. We have Iranian proxy forces operating in Iraq and Syria. Hezbollah remains coiled in Lebanon. This is not happening in a vacuum. This is happening in the single worst possible geopolitical environment for an incident exactly like this. Now, let me explain why the location of this incident matters as much as the incident itself. Because if you don't understand the Strait of Hormuz, you cannot understand why markets are reacting the way they are tonight. And oh, the markets. We'll get to that. What's happening in energy markets right now is breathtaking. But first, the Strait. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage of water between Iran and Oman. At its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide. The shipping lanes, the actual navigable channels that tankers can use, are even narrower, 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. Through this tiny bottleneck flows roughly 20 to 21 million barrels of oil every single day. That is approximately 20% of the entire world's oil supply. 1/5 of all the oil consumed on this planet passes through a channel that is, in some places, narrower than the length of a large shopping mall. Saudi Arabia's oil goes through it. The UAE's oil goes through it. Kuwait's oil goes through it. Qatar's liquefied natural gas, which heats homes and powers electricity across Europe and Asia, goes through it. Iraq sends a significant portion of its exports through it. There is no alternative. There is no plan B. There is no detour. If the Strait of Hormuz closes even temporarily, the global energy system doesn't just get disrupted, it seizes. Like an engine running without oil. It stops. And Iran knows this. Iran has always known this. It is their single greatest strategic leverage point, and they have spent decades building the military capability to threaten it, to close it, and to make any conflict in that waterway extraordinarily costly for the United States Navy. Which brings us to what is happening in markets right now. And I want to be precise about this because the numbers are genuinely staggering. Within minutes of the first reports of this incident, Brent crude futures surged. We are looking at price spikes that traders are describing as the most violent upward move since the early days of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Some early indications are showing jumps that could push oil well beyond recent ceilings if this situation escalates even slightly. And it's not just crude oil. Natural gas futures are spiking. Shipping insurance rates for vessels transiting the strait, which were already elevated because of the Houthi threat in the nearby Red Sea, are now in uncharted territory. Lloyd's of London, the world's most important insurance market, is reportedly in emergency consultations about reclassifying the entire Persian Gulf as a war risk zone. If that happens, the cost of moving oil through that region doesn't just go up, it goes through the roof. And guess who pays for that? You, me. Every person on this planet who drives a car, heats a home, buys food that was transported by truck or ship. The inflationary implications alone are enough to keep every central banker in the world awake tonight. Now, let's talk about the military dimension. Because there are questions tonight that demand answers, and so far, we are not getting them. Question 1. Was this aircraft manned? This is the single most important variable in determining what happens next. If this was an unmanned surveillance drone similar to the Global Hawk shot down in 2019, then the United States has a painful but survivable decision tree. There are options for measured responses. Sanctions, cyber operations, diplomatic isolation, a proportional military strike against the specific air defense battery that fired the missile. But if there were American service members on that aircraft, if American pilots or crew are dead or missing tonight, then the political and strategic calculus changes so dramatically that it's almost a different category of event entirely. Because no American president, none can absorb the loss of American military lives to an Iranian missile and respond with restraint alone. The domestic political pressure for a significant military response would be overwhelming. And the Pentagon, which has spent years planning for a potential conflict with Iran, has options ready. Detailed, rehearsed, ready to execute options. Question 2. Was this authorized at the highest levels of the Iranian government? This is a question that sounds simple, but is actually extraordinarily complicated. Iran's military command structure is not monolithic. The regular Iranian military, the Artesh and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, operate somewhat independently. The IRGC, in particular, has field commanders who have historically demonstrated a willingness to take aggressive action that may or may not have been explicitly authorized by Tehran. The Quds Force, the IRGC Navy, the Aerospace Division, these are organizations with their own institutional cultures, their own risk tolerances, and their own ideological motivations. Was this a calculated decision by Supreme Leader Khamenei? Was it an IRGC commander acting within broad authorization but making a specific tactical decision independently? Was it a miscalculation, a crew that misidentified the aircraft or misjudged its position? The answer to that question determines whether this is a crisis that can be managed or a spark that ignites something much, much larger. And the world is reacting in real time. The UN Security Council has been called into emergency session. European leaders are issuing statements calling for restraint from both sides, the diplomatic equivalent of standing between two people in a bar fight and asking everyone to calm down. China, which imports massive quantities of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, has called for, quote, all parties to exercise maximum restraint. Russia, predictably, has said nothing substantive. But here's the reaction that matters most tonight. And this is something I want you to really think about. Israel. Israel, which has been engaged in its own shadow war with Iran for years through cyber attacks, through targeted assassinations of nuclear scientists, through strikes on Iranian assets in Syria, Israel is watching this with an intensity that is hard to overstate. Because if the United States enters a direct military confrontation with Iran, the strategic landscape of the entire Middle East reshapes overnight. Hezbollah's calculus changes. Hamas's calculus changes. The Abraham Accords countries, the UAE, Bahrain, are suddenly in an extraordinarily uncomfortable position, sitting between their security partnership with the United States and their geographic vulnerability to Iranian retaliation. Everything is connected. Every thread pulls on every other thread. And tonight, one of those threads just got yanked hard. So what happens next? Let me walk you through the scenarios that military and foreign policy analysts are gaming out right now. Scenario 1, de-escalation. Both sides step back from the brink. The United States determines the aircraft was unmanned. Iran claims it was operating in Iranian airspace and releases what it says is supporting evidence. Back-channel communications, perhaps through Oman, perhaps through the Swiss embassy in Tehran, which represents U.S. interests, facilitate a quiet stand-down. Markets stabilize after a few days of volatility. This is the best-case scenario. And honestly, based on the current environment, it might also be the least likely. Scenario 2, proportional response. The United States conducts a targeted military strike against the specific Iranian air defense system that fired the missile, perhaps also against the radar installations that supported it. This is the eye for an eye approach. It sends a message without triggering a full-scale war. Iran absorbs the strike, declares victory for having stood up to America, and both sides retreat to their corners. This is what happened in January 2020, when the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani, and Iran responded with a missile strike on Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. Both sides escalated, both sides stopped, and the world exhaled. But that model only works if both sides are willing to accept the exchange and stop, and there is no guarantee of that tonight. Scenario 3, escalation spiral. This is the nightmare scenario. The U.S. responds with force. Iran retaliates, perhaps by launching missiles at U.S. bases in the region, perhaps by activating proxy forces in Iraq and Syria, perhaps by mining the Strait of Hormuz itself. Each response triggers a counter-response. Allies get pulled in. Oil supplies get disrupted on a massive scale. And suddenly you're looking at the most significant military confrontation in the Middle East since the Gulf War. I want to be clear, I am not predicting scenario 3, but I am telling you that serious people in serious positions are not ruling it out tonight. And then there's the domestic political dimension, and I would be failing you if I didn't address it. This is happening during an extraordinarily charged political environment in the United States. How the administration responds to this, the speed, the tone, the proportionality, will be dissected, analyzed, and weaponized by every political faction in Washington before the sun comes up tomorrow. Hawks will demand overwhelming force. Doves will demand diplomacy. And the American public, which has spent 20 years exhausted by Middle Eastern conflicts, will be watching to see whether their leaders have learned anything from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Libya, from Syria. The decisions made in the next 24 to 48 hours could define this presidency. They could define this era of American foreign policy. And they will almost certainly affect the price you pay for gasoline, for groceries, for heating your home this winter. This is not abstract. This is not theoretical. This is happening right now. And I want to leave you with this thought, because I think it's the most important thing I can say tonight. The Strait of Hormuz has been called the most important choke point in the world for decades, and for decades the United States has maintained a massive naval presence in the Persian Gulf specifically to keep it open. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, cruisers, submarines, minesweepers. The Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, exists for this purpose. But here's the uncomfortable truth that tonight's events are forcing us to confront. Deterrence only works if all parties believe the cost of aggression outweighs the benefit. And something has shifted. Whether it's the distraction of multiple simultaneous global crises, whether it's a perception of American fatigue or division, whether it's Iran's own internal political dynamics driving its leadership toward confrontation, something has shifted. And that shift is what makes tonight so dangerous. Because when deterrence fails, when one side decides that the calculus has changed enough to take a shot, literally, at the other, you're no longer in the realm of strategic competition. You're in the realm of conflict. And conflict has its own logic, its own momentum, its own terrible gravity. We will be covering this story throughout the night and into tomorrow. We have reporters at the Pentagon, at the State Department, at the White House, and in the region. As we learn more, you will learn more. But right now, tonight, I want you to understand the magnitude of what has happened. An American military aircraft has been shot down by Iran over the most strategically vital waterway on Earth. Oil prices are surging. Global markets are shaking. And the two most powerful military forces in the Middle East are staring at each other across 21 miles of water, waiting to see what happens next. Stay with us. This story is far from over. If this story is developing as fast as it seems, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and have notifications turned on so you don't miss a single update. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what's happening right now. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and I want to know what you think. We'll be back with more as this unfolds.